Welcome to Manifest This Believer versus Skeptic. I'm Sharon Giroux, your resident skeptic who asks all the tough questions. And with me is Jennifer Neal, our manifesting maestro. Whether you're rolling your eyes or raising your vibration, we dive into all things manifestation, mindset, and energy from every side. Hit subscribe, settle in, and get ready for spirited debates, surprising experiments, and laughter on the journey to creating a life you love. Welcome to Manifest This Believer versus Skeptic. Today, we're going to start moving in a slightly different direction. And Jennifer and I are going to have a chat about your invisible power. If this is true, everything changes. So we're going to start. This might be a couple of parts, right, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a question that if you actually let this land, it disrupts everything you think you know about your life. And we're going to talk about this book, Your Invisible Power, for the next few episodes, because I think it's really important, especially if there's somebody out there that really says they want a different life or they want something in their life that they don't have or can't have or they think they can't bring into their life. Genevieve Barrand is the author of this book. She was the only student of Thomas Troward during the years of 1912 and 1913. So this isn't new stuff. She wrote the book in 1921. And she says in this book something that blew me away. I'm reading it again for the probably 15th time. If we are truly capable of creating whatever we want, and we are, by the way, then why do we struggle so much? Why is there sickness? Why is there poverty? Why do people get stuck in patterns they clearly don't want and they still end up with this idea that manifestation doesn't work for them?
Okay, so we're looking at the book Your Invisible Power by Genevieve Bertrand. And I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, let's be honest. No one's waking up saying, I'd love to struggle today.
Right.
People aren't consciously choosing illness or debt or grief or disappointment or repeated failure. So when I hear a claim, and this is where you and I have the friction. So when I hear a claim like you create your reality, my first reaction isn't inspiration, it's friction. So either that statement is missing an awful lot of nuance, or it's really collapsing under the weight of our actual human experience. And I think that matters because if we're going to talk about manifestation seriously, then we can't just cherry pick the success stories and ignore everything that doesn't fit. And it's really sort of the tension between you and I, the believer versus the skeptic. So I think we have to ask the harder questions like what are we claiming? What are the limits of the claim? And how do we talk about personal agency without drifting into oversimplification or worse, maybe blaming people for circumstances that they didn't knowingly choose?
That's exactly the point, right? And so this is where this book comes in, Your Invisible Power. And listen, folks, this book is 93, 94 pages long. I'm not asking a lot of you, but if you really are here and you're only, let's face it, you're only listening to this podcast or following us on the other channels because something's not there yet or something's not right yet in your life.
You mean it's
So
not because they love and adore us?
no, I don't think so. I'd love to think that, but, I think we can help. So, where this book comes in is not so much as inspiration, but as instruction, okay? So,
Okay.
you could literally take this book. The challenge is this book is written in 1912. So, some of the vocabulary and communication is really heady, like it's difficult to understand. So, what I would like us to do over the next few episodes is debunk this book into segments that make sense so that anybody can understand how to change their life.
This is great that we're going into your invisible power. And I think, Jen, what we're doing is going back to our first principles when I came to you and said, I need an owner's manual or a user manual because I don't understand this stuff. So I'm excited that we're sort of moving into something a lot more instructional. So, what's the premise? What are we doing?
Well, the core premise is actually very confronting for a lot of people. And it basically says this: the reason most people don't experience the life they want, and this can be anything, This can be the lifestyle you want, the baby you want, the marriage you want, maybe the divorce you want, the things you want, the experiences you want, the career you want. It doesn't matter what it is you want. It isn't because these things are unavailable to you, because they are. And I don't care what you've been told about any of those things. It's because people, we never take the time to actually understand the laws of life, the laws of the universe that govern how life actually works. So this isn't a case of, I can't have this. This is a case of, you're not spending enough time understanding how you can have and get these things.
Okay, so pause for just a second here. Laws of life sounds a little slippery to me. Are we talking about psychology, like attention, expectation, behavior? Are we talking about something metaphysical? Are we talking about spirituality dressed up as certainty? Because those things are not all the same. And if we're going to use the word law, I want to know what kind of law we need. So, gravity is measurable, it's testable, it behaves consistently, whether I believe it or not. So when people say there are mental laws, I want to separate what might be observable, like how belief shapes behavior and perception, from much broader claims that sound powerful, but harder to verify. So I'm not rejecting it, just want the foundation to be really clean before we build on it.
So you spoke about gravity, and you actually said gravity is measurable, it's testable, and it behaves consistently whether I believe in it or not.
Right.
I want you to think about the law of the universe, the laws of the universe in the same way, whether you believe in them or not. Okay. So let's think of gravity. You don't have to believe in gravity for it to work. You don't even see gravity. You see the effect of gravity. You don't have to understand it for it to affect you. But once you do understand it, you can work with it instead of against it. And let's face it, gravity came up as a subject in our earlier educational programs, right?
Right.
We learned about gravity. Whether you really went down that road and really understood it or not, we learned about gravity in our past. Did you ever learn about the laws of the universe? The other laws of the universe? Did you ever learn about the law of attraction?
No, and I guess so that's where we're going is that we've talked about the actual laws in our podcast before, like cause and effect, but I think the disconnect for me at least is understanding that this stuff happens mentally.
Yeah, but it's like so many things that you use every day, Sharon, like the power that comes out of your electrical outlet.
Right. We've used this example
Rely on
before. Yeah.
Yeah, you rely on it, you expect it to be there. Do you actually understand? Well, you probably do, but let's not go there. Do you actually understand how water moving a turbine over Niagara Falls actually turns into electricity that you can blow your hair with? I'm going to
Right.
argue most people don't.
I,
So just because you haven't studied the laws doesn't mean they don't exist, and it doesn't mean that they're not there to assist and support you.
and this is where I think your guidance is going to help us move from having to understand because the stuff seems so ethereal to you don't necessarily have to understand. You've got to just recognize that it exists. And
Yeah,
that's where you come in.
exactly. So what I'm saying is the reason people aren't getting the results they want to see in their life isn't because that they are broken, is because they don't know what they're doing. It's like me going to the gym one day and expecting to come out looking ripped. It's just not going to happen like that.
Okay.
So, one of the
So
most yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so so where I struggle is, in terms of not seeing results, like people visualize and they try and they do vision boards and affirmations. And we've talked about all this in the past. And still don't get the results. So the question is always the why. Is it inconsistency or internal contradiction, which you and I have
Yes.
talked
Yes,
about?
yeah. Yes, yes.
So, yeah. Or is there sometimes a framework that overstates the power of thought and understates the role of timing or skill or access or just, bad luck? Because I think that's where people push back. And even after chatting with you for the last year over this, it's not because I'm or anyone might be closed minded. It's because we live enough life to know that wanting something deeply does not guarantee that it shows up. And we might see glimmers all of a sudden, and you've actually helped me see those glimmers happen here and there. And I think most people can say, I really wanted that bike when I was 8 years old, and all of a sudden I won the bike.
Mhm.
So I think I'm not interested in a system where every failure gets explained away as you didn't believe hard enough, because that seems a bit circular.
But that's what it is. I hate to say that.
Okay.
So, like, going back to the beginning, most of the most important things, if you remember one thing about this episode, is this: your outer world, everything you see and experience, is shaped by your inner mental images. And I know that's tough to swallow.
Yeah.
It's not your wishes, it's not your words, but it's your dominant mental pictures. Okay. So, if you started talking about, if I want the bike, and I don't get the bike, is it because I didn't have enough faith, or is it because I didn't believe enough? Most people will visualize what they want, maybe for an hour, right? Maybe for a day. I don't know anybody actually that has visualized and sat down for a day. I
Okay.
did for almost the entire weekend. I did on something, but then they'll stop because they got better things to do, or they've got to go places or do things, or, you know, get on with life.
Okay.
But it's the stopping. Like you just said, is it inconsistency? Is it internal contradiction? Yes, yes, and yes.
Okay.
So it's that it does take some willpower, and we'll talk about this. But when you don't stick with it, when you don't stay with what you want in detail, don't be surprised when something different or nothing shows up.
Okay, so I hear you talking about the principle. The principle is fine. It's how we apply
Well,
the
that's where the work,
principle that's not working.
yeah, and I can tell you how I apply it, but it might not work for you. So my hope is that if you understand the theory of it enough, you will start to find ways to actually practice this. And you can go back in all of our other podcasts to figure out some of the this is how I do it stuff. But today we're just going to talk about educating on what is possible and why it works.
Okay, so if we're looking at the real mechanism and we break this down without being poetic, what's actually happening when someone is holding a mental picture? Is the claim that the image changes the person and then the person changes their behavior, decisions, persistence, and what they notice? Because that sort of makes sense. But if the claim is that thought itself reorganizes external reality directly, then I think that's where we might lose people or we might need a more careful explanation. Because a lot of this space, I think, suffers from some vague language that sounds really profound, right? But it avoids the precision, the mechanism that I keep pushing on. And, maybe that's the issue. You hear manifestation, you sort of assume, okay, well, it's magical. When there might be a more grounded version that's part of mental conditioning at a high level.
So, again, I encourage you to read this book if you really want to change your life. And the book explains it like this. And I'm sorry if it sounds simple, and I'm sorry if it sounds poetic, but it is what it is. And if you really want to understand it, it won't sound so profound anymore. It will actually start to make sense. So I'm not for 1 minute expecting people to be able to grasp this out of this podcast today. This is a big, big topic. And what we're trying to do is break it down so that everybody can understand how much power they have to have everything they want in their life. So, back to the book. The book explains it like this: there is a creative energy. I don't care what you call it. I mean, ultimately, I do, but for today's sake, I don't care if you call it life. I don't care if you call it source. I don't care if you call it consciousness. I don't care if you call it God. I don't care if you call it the Holy Spirit. That energy is real and it responds to the direction of your thoughts. If the power went out right now, Sharon, that's all you need to know. There is a power. I don't care if you believe it or not. There is a power and it responds to you, to the direction of your thoughts. And your thoughts take shape through images. So when you consistently hold a mental picture, you are giving that creative energy a mold or a blueprint to follow. Does
Okay,
that make sense?
so what you're saying is that the image is the instruction.
Yes. So you're
Okay.
basically saying in your mind, I want this. Okay. You put in the order, I want this.
Okay, so the instruction is different from a wish, right? Because a wish is vague
Yeah,
and an
this is
instruction
specific.
has direction.
If you know, there's so much in this, but if you can get specific on that image, if you can
Okay.
get specific on what that want is, that becomes the actual blueprint that God source life consciousness will build to.
Okay, but doesn't it also mean that people are also unintentionally instructing themselves in the wrong direction?
Yes,
Because,
for
you know,
sure.
fear is repetitive, worry is repetitive, old narratives are repetitive. So if someone says they want abundance,
Yeah,
but mentally rehearses loss and scarcity all day, then the issue isn't the desire, it's the practice.
100%. And
Okay.
that's the part people keep missing. It's not about creating that picture once. I want that dress. It's about sustaining it over and over and over again until it becomes your dominant reality internally, which is a fancy way of saying until you believe it so much to your core that it is a normal thing that you know it's here.
Okay. So I think this is where people check out because it feels too simple. And I think people reject it not because they're lazy, but because life is complicated. Health, money, trauma, all complicated. So when someone says just hold the image, it can sound like a reduction of reality rather than an explanation of it. But maybe, I don't know, maybe the distinction is this: simple doesn't mean simplistic. A principle can be simple, but really difficult to execute consistently.
I mean, it's dismissed often because it's too simple, or it's avoided because it requires too much discipline. I guess it depends on how badly do you want it. If I said to you, if you said to me, I'd like to lose 20 pounds,
Right.
but I don't change the way I eat and I don't change the way I move my body and I don't change the way I want to see myself. And you come back to me, 2 months later and say, I didn't change anything, Jennifer, and I'm still 20 pounds too heavy. I would say to you, of, yeah, of course you are. It's pretty simple. Move your body, eat less food. Why do we believe it when it has something to do with that? But we don't want to believe it when it's something that's almost too good to be true. You mean there really is a Santa Claus? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I'm a slam dunk, as you know.
Right. Okay. So,
So it is simple, but it's not easy. And that's the difference.
okay. So, what happens if someone doesn't learn this? Because what you're saying is they're still doing it. They're still imagining and rehearsing outcomes and expectations, even if they're not sort of conscious around it. And that kind of means that if we have this mental drift, it's not neutral. So being in fear isn't neutral because something's happening. And that's kind of uncomfortable because it sort of eliminates that whole illusion we have that we're positive.
100%. And here's the difference between a power outlet and the power of this unbelievable power we're talking about. The power always sits in the outlet, right? The power's always there.
Uh-huh.
Then you have to stick in the appliance to see the result. The difference with this kind of power we're talking about, your invisible power that we're talking about, is it is always in use. It is always being tapped into. You are still using this power. This law is still working. You're just doing it unconsciously. Okay. So you're still holding images, fear, lack, worst case scenarios. Those become the blueprint.
So you're manifesting either way, whether you're conscious of it or not. I mean, that part sticks because then the question isn't, are you doing it? Because you're doing it regardless. It's, are you doing it consciously or just repeating what you've always thought?
Exactly. So the question is, are you doing it on purpose?
Wow.
Most people aren't doing it on purpose, right? They're doing it just because it's all they know.
Okay. So it's someone listening and then thinking, okay, fine, I'll do this properly. And, this is where I become your guinea pig, as it were, or my own guinea pig. So where does someone start without turning it into another abandoned self-help experiment? Because, people don't need more inspiration. We need the method, the instruction.
Well, here's what I would say. I would start here. Pick one thing, and be specific. So if you can't be specific about things like money or lifestyle, maybe you start with, for example, a dress. Maybe you start with a dress or an article of clothing. Maybe you start with an article of clothing, not your entire life, not 10 goals, one simple article of clothing. Okay.
Okay.
And then begin to mentally see yourself already in that article of clothing. And I'm going to give you an extra little tip here. For those people that cannot see mentally in their mind, and there are people like this, I happen to be one of them, find that article of clothing, pull it up on Pinterest, and you will notice that Pinterest will start to give you that article of clothing over and over. And it's an algorithm, right? It will start to show it to you in all the places you least expect it. When you open it up in an hour, it'll be there again, right in front. And if you click on it, you'll go into a deeper dive of that thing. If you struggle to see mentally, here's your little tip. Pull out Pinterest and click on an item with great detail and start to see yourself already having that.
Okay, so I'm going to go off on a nerd tangent for a moment here, Jen, because based on what you said, has sparked a little inspiration.
Okay.
For all the stuff we say about social media and AI and algorithms, we could actually leverage this to work in our favor because if we're opening up our phones or our computers or what have you, or our phones are actually listening to us, and we articulate a specific scene like you're suggesting, that specific reality, then we can start to get fed that over and over and over again to build a reality with the help of algorithms and AI.
1,000%. And you can do this so fast. And I mean within 24, 48 hours. So I'm going to repeat it again. Pick one thing, not your entire life, not 1,000 goals. Pick one thing with great detail and then begin to mentally see yourself already having that thing. In the book, she uses the word insist, not would be nice. Insist on holding that image. Continue to look at that picture in Pinterest. Continue to open up Pinterest. Continue to open up and look at and click into. Continue, insist, not occasionally, repeatedly. I cannot emphasize this enough.
Okay, so
Consistently bring your mind back to it over and over. Whenever you've got a coffee break, open it up. Whenever you've got a minute in the day, open it up.
so it's less about the effort and it's more about returning. And I think that's important because I think people think they need intensity. And maybe what we're looking at is really consistency. So not one powerful moment, but as you say, repeated redirection. And to me,
Yeah.
that feels more grounded.
And it's really fun. Like, let's not lose the funness of this. I know that's not a word. Isn't it great to look at things you want all the time?
Yeah,
Why
absolutely.
why not create that any way you can, whether it's a vision board or a Pinterest channel? It's a discipline of direction. I have a lot of choice in my day, how I spend my day. I can go ride my bike, which I might do. I can go for a walk, which I might do. But if I am sitting, I'm telling you this right now. If I'm sitting and I got 5 minutes to spare, I got my face in Pinterest all the time. And my life is pretty darn great.
Okay, so I'm going to admit something here. I haven't ignored these ideas. It's sort of hard to when we do a podcast every week, but I don't think I've fully committed to them either. I just sort of test them lightly and whenever they're convenient, but I actually haven't looked at what I rehearse all day, especially when I'm tired or stressed. And if I'm honest, that's probably where the pattern lives, not in what I want to say, but in what I repeatedly expect.
Yeah, and I mean, you're going to hear from listen, I eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. It's no
Yeah.
wonder my life is as wonderful as it is. I eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. Everybody has a choice.
Uh-huh.
Everybody can eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. How badly do you want the thing you want?
Right.
So that's why this series matters to me, because we're not just going to talk about this, we're going to train people in this. That is my hope.
Okay.
So here's where we start. If your life is shaped by the mental images you hold, then the work is very simple. Become aware of what you're actually seeing and begin to choose it on purpose.
Okay. So I think in the next episode, I'd like to go deeper on this because you know me, I want precision and an owner's manual. So I want to understand what we're doing and have a bit more clarity.
You bet. You got it. See you next time.
See you later, Jen.
Thanks for tuning in to Manifest This. Believer versus Skeptic. If you enjoyed today's conversation, share it with a friend, believer or skeptic. And don't forget to leave us a review so others can join in the debate. Plus, check out Jennifer's TikTok account, Manifestation RX, where she writes daily prescriptions for manifesting your dreams. Think practical tips with a dash of magic. We love hearing your questions and stories, so tell us what you're manifesting or questioning this week. Until next time, keep an open mind and maybe manifest a little magic.